Let's talk audio interface. An audio interface is a device that is designed to allow input and output of audio from a personal computer running audio software. Audio interfaces connect to the computer using FireWire or USB protocols, or using a dedicated expansion card that installs in a slot in the computer. Some of the features you'll find in these audio interfaces, although not all features are found on all interfaces, are mic-level audio inputs, line-level audio inputs, instrument-level audio inputs, line-level audio outputs, SPDIF format optical or coaxial inputs and outputs, AES EBU format digital input and outputs, ADAT optical format 8-channel input and output, studio monitor control features such as mute, dim, volume control, speaker switching, headphone outputs with volume controls, MIDI input and output, built-in DSP for low latency cue mixing, built-in DSP for effects such as reverb or delay while tracking. That's a lot of stuff, but let's break it down to find out what you really need to get started. Inputs and outputs. You need a way to connect an input to record, and this should be a mic input with phantom power, and maybe a 1/4-inch line level input. Then you need outputs, at least 2 for right and left, and probably a headphone output. Lastly, you'll need a way to connect this with the computer, and this will probably be in the form of USB or FireWire. The number of inputs and outputs is only limited by your budget. I chose my audio interface back in 2004, and because I wanted to record drums, I figured I would need at least 8 inputs. Practically, I have only ever used it to record multiple tracks a few times, because as drum plugins improved, I didn't really need to record my own drums anymore. For the last 6 years, I have basically only used 2 inputs, one for a mic input and the other for my Line 6 guitar pedal. Pricing for inputs and outputs, which is basically the thing that you pay for, hasn't really changed all that much in the last several years, but I'm sure that quality, latency, and noise performance definitely has been improved. There are also some standalone digital audio recorders out there. I use a Tascam DR100 for recording audio when I'm doing video production, and it works well. This unit has 2 XLR inputs with phantom power, line level inputs, headphone and line level outputs, and it has 2 sets of stereo microphones built in, an omnidirectional set and a unidirectional set in an XY pattern. It runs on batteries and records to SD memory cards. There are many other devices out there that have more features, more inputs, more outputs, and are available at all different price points. Now, at some point in the recording process, you will need to hear what you have recorded, and this brings us to headphone and studio monitors. Studio monitors are special speakers designed to give you a very precise, uncolored reproduction of sound. You will almost certainly need headphones and studio monitors because you will want to monitor the audio as you record it. And you can't do this with studio monitors unless you are in a separate room, and it is acoustically isolated from where you are recording. Otherwise, you will get bleed from the speakers into the microphone, or worse, feedback, which can destroy speakers and your hearing. Headphones also allow you and your talent to hear what is going on while recording, and this is important. Studio monitors range from out-of-this-world expensive to budget bargain basement. Select something that fits your budget, but this is not a place to skimp or cheap out. Most studio monitors are fairly small, but you should consider getting something with at least an 8-inch speaker or larger. Otherwise, you won't have an accurate representation of low frequencies. If you get a smaller speaker system, you could also augment the low frequency with a subwoofer, but you may want to find a set that is designed to go together. Headphones are probably a little less critical, and you can definitely get some great sounding headphones for cheap. What may be more important is how comfortable they are. You could be wearing them for extended periods of time, and they can get really uncomfortable on the ears. The last component, besides the computer, is software. The software handles the recording and the processing of audio files. There are many applications out there, such as Studio One, Sonar, Reason, Pro Tools, Logic, GarageBand, and more. Some apps are PC or Mac only, but the one I like best is Reaper. Reaper is a powerhouse of an application, supports just about any hardware, uses nearly every kind of plugin, is consistently updated, the install file is very small, and it's cheap. In the next section, we're going to take a look at what's inside of Reaper. You'll find a lot of the controls and functions are the same throughout a range of applications. But let's jump in and find out more. So here we are inside of Reaper. Now, what you're seeing inside this program is somewhat similar to what you'll find in many audio recording applications. Even though there are several out there, they all have some similar traits. For example, this section right here is called the transport controls. And here's where you'll find the play, pause, record, and loop or repeat buttons. You can also rewind and go to the beginning of your project or the end of your project with that button. You also find your time indicator here. This gives you your actual time, and this is a representation of how many measures and beats you are at any given time. So if we go back to the beginning, you see we're at measure 1, beat number 1. And that's helpful for when you're recording music. Now you also see this kind of layout in many programs. This is a representation of the track mixer, and it's kind of similar to the old way of mixing where you might be using a tape recorder and then you would play that tape recorder back through an actual hardware mixer, an analog mixer. And so this gives you fader controls and some routing. This is a mute button, so we can mute this particular channel or solo this particular channel. And yeah, it also gives you this button here, record, arms the track for recording, which makes it able to record. You can also set the input here. And if you pull this up here, you can also put in plugins or effects on these tracks, and that's where they would lie here. Very similar to if you're using a hardware mixer back in the old days, and you would use a physical reverb, for example. You would insert that into a particular track or into a particular subgroup and send instruments to it. Now, this section up here is where we have the actual recorded sound sources. So you can see here, let me get rid of this mixer panel. And so here you can see what multi-track recording is all about. Each one of these tracks or lanes is a separate instrument. And you can see that if I solo this, you will hear on this channel, it's a Rhodes keyboard. If I solo this channel, it is a pad or a synth kind of sound. This is a high guitar part, which I just named. This is the bass guitar. This is a rhythm guitar. Here's another rhythm guitar and another rhythm guitar. And then down here we have what's called a track folder or a subgroup. Some other applications may refer to it as a subgroup. This is the drums. Now we have individual drum tracks in here. So this one right here is the kick drum. And you can see here, those are the actual waves from the kick drum recording. We scroll down, we can take a look at, this is the snare drum. Actually, the snare drum has reverb on it. So that's exactly what the microphone would be hearing. And then you have a hi-hat and toms and some overhead microphones, which get a general mix of the entire drum kit. And so with this kind of setup, you have a lot of power and flexibility. For example, if I was recording an entire band, I could theoretically plug in each instrument into an audio interface and record the entire band's performance with all of the instruments on a separate track, just like this. I mean, imagine if this were the drummer right here. These were two separate guitar players and a third guitar player right here, and maybe this guy's the bass player. Scroll that up. Here's another guitar player who has some cool stereo effects that he's playing. Here's a keyboard player, and here's another keyboard player. And we could have vocals and on and on. The number of tracks that you can play back in a system like this is only limited to the processing power of your computer. Now, my particular computer can run more tracks than you'd ever need to. I've done projects where I've recorded somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 different vocal tracks, doing a lot of vocal percussion and things of that nature. It also gives you the ability to adjust the volume of each track, not only globally by moving this fader here, or this volume fader. So we could make this quieter. We can make it louder. But the other thing you can do in these applications is do something called track automation. And that means that you can adjust the volume over time. So as this plays, I can put in a keyframe here and then put another one here. So now you can see this is the volume, what they call an envelope. So basically, the volume will follow whatever this line does. And that is a very, very powerful tool for when you are mixing all of these instruments together. It gives you the ability to really, really finesse the various volumes of different instruments. If you have a singer who sings a particular passage quieter, you can boost that whole passage up. So you can not only automate the volume of a track, you can also, in modern applications, automate nearly every parameter that has any adjustment whatsoever. This button here brings up all of the automation properties for this particular track. So we can automate the volume, the pan, the volume pre-effects, the mute. We can also automate where this track is going. So right now, this bass is being sent out to a separate channel, which is adding some more kind of subharmonic frequencies. And we can automate that by clicking here. We can also automate the send to the sub, pan, and mute. And also we can automate all of the effects that are on this channel. So I have an EQ on here, which is giving it a little bit of a curve. And I also have a compressor here, which is kind of just regulating a little bit of the dynamics of this bass guitar. And in here, I can automate all of those parameters, and it can get very complex, but that just shows you some of the power that's available in these audio applications. Now, like we said before, this is a multi-track recording and editing application. But that doesn't mean that you have to record more than one track at the same time, or even play back one of the more than one track at the same time. For instance, you could imagine that this might be a recording of an entire band, where we have the drummer, the guitar players, the bass guy, and maybe 2 keyboard players. When in actuality, I was the one who recorded all of these instruments. I recorded each track individually. So I would set up a track to record, arm it for recording, go back to the beginning here, and I usually set up a metronome in here so I can hear where the beats are. And then I would record. So I'd lay down my guitar and so on and so forth. And that really is one of the most powerful aspects of this program is you can basically go back and record over and over and over again until you get it right. Or you can take multiple sources from pre-recorded things and mix them together to get all kinds of new results. The possibilities are literally endless. Let's talk a little bit about some of the controls you get here. Let's look at just the Rhodes track for a second. We'll solo this. And what soloing is we're only hearing this track. It basically shuts off the sound playback from the other instruments. So at this point in time, we can only hear this one track. Now what we have here, this meter here is showing you how much signal is coming back through this channel. And that's useful if I were to what's called normalize this track, Oops, I normalized the wrong one. So now that track is a lot louder. And basically what normalizing does is take the highest peak or the loudest thing that was recorded or is in the audio track and pushes that all the way up here to 0 decibels. So basically you can't go above 0 decibels because then it goes into clipping and distortion. So this basically took the loudest thing that was there, which was down here or something, and pushes it all the way up to the top. Oh, it actually was right there. Right here, you can see that this track hit negative 0.1 decibels, which is just about the loudest you can get on a single track. Now, you don't want all of your tracks like that because the summing of a whole bunch of tracks that are basically as loud as they can be means that the end result is way too loud. But that gives you an idea of what this meter is. So this is showing you what the playback is. Now, also we have here, this is a pan control. Now, pan controls how it gets routed from the right to the left. This is another parameter that is automatable. So the signal is showing you that because it's panned to the center, it's coming through both right and left channels, even though this is a mono source, meaning that it only has one channel. It's being routed because this is a stereo project, meaning that the output is going to 2 channels. This one channel is being routed to both the left and the right channel equally. And if we move this, say 61% to the right, now you'll see that reflected in the metering. And I can actually change the metering here, big meter. So now you can see. Let's put it back the way it was before, because I don't like that at all. Now, this is the volume fader, just like you would find on an analog mixer console. Here you have, this is your input selection. So if I was setting up this channel to record, I would click this, and this gives me a number of options to select which input I want to record. Now, on my particular setup, I have 8 analog inputs plus 2 digital inputs. This is actually a stereo, so I can choose the left side of the stereo or the right, and that'll get recorded as a mono track because this input is just for mono. Now, if I select stereo, these inputs are grouped in 2s. So this is the input for analog input 1 and 2. Then there's 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and so on and so forth. You can even do analog input 8 to digital SPDIF input left and group those as a stereo channel. You can also select a MIDI input to record if you wanted to control a virtual instrument or a synth. In this panel here, this is the, that little I/O stands for input and output. And this is basically where you can route this track to go. So this is telling you that this track is going to the master bus, which are 1 and 2. And this track contains 2 channels. And this is the volume. Now we could send this someplace else, which is where this is here. And you can see this already has a send to the verb, which is short for reverb. Now I have the reverb muted, but if I unmute it, you can hear. Now it sounds like it's in a large hall or something. And that's how I added reverb to this particular project. I took the signal that was coming from this channel, and not only is it going to the master, it's also going to the reverb, but a lot less of it's going to the reverb. See, this represents the full signal amount. And then it was more like down here. And that's how you can kind of adjust. Now you can also set this track to receive. Say I want to get some of the rhythm guitar for whatever reason coming back on this track. I don't know why you would do that for this particular track, but as you can see, you can have a lot of flexibility. You could also set, let me turn that off. You can also set this track to play back through one of the outputs of your audio interface. So if for whatever reason you might want to send just this channel out, you could send it through any one of the outputs, any one of the analog or digital outputs. So you can see you have a lot of flexibility. And then here, of course, you can name the track. This is the mute button. So it's actually soloed and muted at the same time, which doesn't really do much. And then here is where you can add effects. You can see right here it says effects. And this is when you click it the first time in this particular application, it brings up the browser to browse what effects you might want. So we could add, say, an equalizer here to this channel. And now you basically have a power button for this, which tells you that the effects are now bypassed or they are enabled. So with an EQ, for example, let me solo this, we could take and modify the frequency bands to kind of shape the frequency spectrum of this particular instrument. Now you could do this on any instrument, and that's often how music is produced. Each track may get a little or a lot of equalization to bring out certain parts of the audio spectrum. It's what gives maybe vocals a super crisp sound, or jazz guitar that really kind of mellow sound. In addition to EQ, there are tons of effects, from compressors to reverbs to gates, which let the sound come through at a particular level and keeps it out when it's below that particular level. These are just the stock plugins that come with Reaper. There's tons and tons of other plugins. These are a plugin that uses the VST protocol. It's basically a somewhat universal plugin system that works with a bunch of different applications. In fact, many of these are available for just about every multi-track audio application. And there's tons of things in here, from guitar cabinet emulators to all kinds of different compressors to things that make it sound low fidelity, all kinds of different things in here. That's pretty much it. So you can see with all these controls, you can get a ton of flexibility in how you can record and then what you can do after it. Now, in addition to that, we can come in here and take this WAV file and we can chop it up. So we can come in here and slice it here. We solo this up. We can move this part over. We can take this, copy it, and now this section here will basically repeat. You see, I caught a little bit of the end of that phrase there, but so you can do this on a more somewhat global scale, where we can take all of these and duplicate them. So say I just recorded the chorus to a song and we need another one. Well, I could record it again, or I could just take the good recording that I already have, copy it, and move it down, and now I have another chorus that's ready to go. And so you can have a ton of flexibility. In fact, I did another tutorial for AudioTutsPlus.com in which I took this very project and I intentionally recorded some things rather sloppily, like this tambourine track here. And the timing of each one of these tambourine recordings, this is 2, and then I grouped them in a stereo channel here, was all over the place. I mean, it sounded like I had never picked up a tambourine before, or I didn't know how to play drums at all. And so you can get in here and make really, really fine adjustments. You can cut this track and then move it so that it lines, each one of these little hits lines up with a beat. And that's how I basically fixed my tambourine track, because the timing was all over the place. And this is another thing that's used in modern recordings, where they'll take a drummer's drum set and they'll take it and chop it all up and make all of the hits, every single hit, be right in time, where, you know, if you were to hear the original, there would be slight variations, even from a pro drummer, you know, a studio drummer. There'd be slight variations and fluctuations to each hit, and everything may not be metronomically perfect, but that's a way that you can do it so that when you take a chorus and you need to grab it right here at beat 1 at measure 10, you will not be grabbing a note that's slightly ahead or slightly behind. You'll be grabbing one that's right on there, so that when you paste stuff around, it's a really accurate way to do that. And then you don't have timing issues if someone's trying to record a guitar part, let's say, to a drum track that's not metronomically perfect. There's some fluctuations. Then his kind of perception of that is going to be all kinds of screwed up. The principles and ideas that I demoed here in Reaper are possible in many applications. Hopefully this has given you an idea of what is possible in multi-track recording software. Let's take a look at a few examples on how to record some different instruments. First, we're going to take a look at how to record an electric guitar. A really simple setup would be an electric guitar amplifier and a microphone. Now, if you look behind me, this is exactly what I have here. The amplifier is a simple 23-watt tube amplifier, and the microphone is a Shure Beta 57. The microphone is positioned right in the center of the cone, and it's maybe 2 to 3 inches from the cone. Now, setting up the microphone this way, pointing directly towards the center of the cone, will give you a good amount of high-frequency response. As you move the microphone away from the center of the cone, you'll get less high-frequency detail. It's also worth noting that when you mic an instrument, or even the human voice, that your results will never sound exactly like it sounds to your ear, especially with an electric guitar amplifier. Because of the way the frequencies radiate from the speaker cone, it doesn't sound anything like it does to your ear. A lot of the high frequencies come straight out of the center of the cone. Most guitar players that I've seen playing on stages and even in the studio don't position their guitar amplifiers so that they are getting a direct kind of feed from this high frequency beam coming from the center of the speaker to their ear. A lot of times you'll see guitar players with their amplifiers on the ground where it's pointing at their knees. So they are hearing something that's quite different than what a microphone pointed directly at the center of the speaker is going to hear. Now you can position the microphone further away, but just like in our other example, that'll get less direct sound and more of an ambient type sound. That may be the sound you're looking for, but let's check out what this setup sounds like. All right, I have my microphone plugged into my audio interface, and I have set the gain so that the loudest sound coming from my guitar at this particular amplifier level will be around -6 decibels. Now, a lot of times in the recording world and the audio world, the volume spectrum is represented from -infinity to 0 decibels. 0 decibels would be the loudest thing. Anything above 0 decibels would be what's called clipping, and that's a type of distortion, and it's very, very bad. A pretty bulletproof technique is to take the loudest possible sound that you're going to get and make that -6 decibels. That gives you about 6 decibels of headroom, or kind of room above the loudest thing, and it gives you a margin of safety. So let's check out at this volume what we got going on here. Cool. We get a nice direct sound. It's full, it's punchy. Now let's check out what a distorted tone might sound like with the same exact setup. With the same microphone at the same distance away from the speaker, changing out these variables, changing the tone, changing the EQ, changing your guitar settings, your pickup settings, your tone settings, you can get an almost limitless number of tonal possibilities. Now, the way I have my guitar amplifier set up right now with both the clean and the distorted signal are with the equalization knobs pretty much flat. So it doesn't have a lot of boost in the low end or the high end, or it's not cutting any mid frequencies. It's just flat right across the board. And generally that gives me a good palette of tone to work with. Now I can further modify that in my recording application with EQ and other sounds. Now I should also tell you that when you're recording electric guitar, it's always a good idea to record a dry signal. So you'll notice that my guitar amplifier didn't have any reverb, it didn't have any compression, it's just my guitar going right into the amplifier. No extra pedals. Now if in your setup you use some compression pedals or some overdrive pedals before the amplifier, that's totally cool to use. That's part of your tone. Anything like delay, chorus, reverb, those kind of modulations and time-based effects, you want to add those after in the recording application because you'll have a tremendous amount of control over them then, whereas if you kind of bake them into the sound now, you're basically stuck with whatever you have. It can make editing a nightmare because as you cut a sound with reverb and kind of trim it and mash it together with other clips, it can sound really messy, and it's a much smoother sound if you record a completely dry signal and then add all of those other effects later. Now you can also get some different tones by using a different microphone. In this situation, I'm using a dynamic microphone, but you could use a large diaphragm condenser like this microphone. You could use a small diaphragm condenser. You have a lot of options. You can also kind of vary the situation by moving the amplifier in your space. If you put your amplifier in the corner, which is how I have mine set up, you may get more low frequency response in your microphone because as you put a sound source in the corner, you're kind of reinforcing the lows. So by putting the amplifier in the middle of the room or near another wall, you may get some different, more desirable sounds. So you have a lot of options, moving things around, changing microphones. This is a basic setup that can get a lot of different tones without very much work. Using an electric guitar amplifier and a microphone is not the only way to record electric guitar. This device here is the Pod X3 Live, and this device models guitar amplifiers, guitar speaker cabinets, stomp boxes, and other effects all inside this hardware unit. Now what I use this for when I'm recording is much more basic. I use it to emulate guitar amplifiers and speaker cabinets and the microphones that would be miking those speaker cabinets. Inside here you can select from a number of different amplifiers and how those are hooked up to some virtual speaker cabinets. So you could have a Vox AC30 amplifier hooked up to an 8x10 Ampeg bass speaker cabinet, and then use that with a Shure SM57 microphone, and then even vary the position of the microphone all inside of here. I use this to get a lot of different tones very, very quickly. In this way, I don't have to have a whole bunch of amplifiers. And the sounds that this produce can be very, very accurate and very, very good if you know how to tweak them. Now, a lot of the sounds do take a good amount of tweaking to get them to sound nice and natural. The good thing about this is that when you're recording, you don't have to have your studio monitors off like you might if you were using a microphone in the same room, because if you had a microphone live in the same room and your studio monitors on, it could present a big problem with feedback and destroy your speakers and or your hearing. This way, you can hear exactly what you're playing and exactly what's being recorded, whereas if you use a guitar amplifier and a microphone, you may be hearing one thing, but the microphone shoved right up into the speaker may actually sound a good bit different. So this type of setup, using this Pod X3 Live, gives me a lot more repeatable type results. Now this is not the newest model, but there's nothing wrong with it. It sounded fantastic when it came out, and it still sounds fantastic today. You can also record bass guitar in the same way using a device just like this, because along with all those amplifier models and speaker models, it also has a lot of bass amplifier and bass speaker models that you can make all kinds of combinations with and record your bass guitar just like this. And in that way, it gives your bass a lot more tonal possibilities for recording. Now, one other way that you can record both your electric guitar and your electric bass, which we'll go into more later, is plugging your instrument directly into your audio interface and then doing the amplifier and cabinet simulation later, digitally, like all digitally in the computer. Line 6 has a plugin called Amp Farm, which is basically all the features of this pedal, but in software, and they probably sound a little bit better. It also is a little bit easier to see because, well, you have pictures of stuff and that's kind of easier to see than just some lines of text. But there's also some other great plugins, Amplitude by Native Instruments, and there's some free ones like FreeAmp 3, Dig. If you do some searching around, you can find some great guitar amplification simulation stuff out there, and that'll give you tons of possibilities. Plugging your guitar or your bass directly in to your audio interface and recording the dry signal gives you a ton of options down the road. So you can add any amp that you could possibly think of, and you get just tons of variations and tons of options. It may not be the fastest way because you can definitely get lost in all the sounds and all the combinations, but it is a super cool way to do it, and it gives you tons of options.